I grew up in Albany, Georgia, which is, if you knew where Atlanta was, I'm roughly about 220 miles south of Atlanta. My father's brother Joseph was a Tuskegee Airman. My father's sister married Jack Hall, who was also a Tuskegee Airman. In my freshman year in college, there was about the time that Martin Luther King was coming pretty regularly through the cities of Atlanta and Albany and the areas where there were some disharmony. And I was sort of active into that crusade as a freshman, and as a consequence managed to get locked up a few times in the Albany jail. Laurie Pritchett, who was the sheriff at that time, came to us and said, since you guys don't really know what you want to do with your life, I'll help you out. I've made sure that the local enlistment board have drafted you, and so tomorrow morning we'll have a bus to take you up to Atlanta to the induction center. The guy that was operating it basically told all of us to line up around the wall as in this room and to count off 1, 2, 3, 4. I happened to be number 4, and all the 4s were in the Marine Corps. I came out of Paris Island going to Camp Geiger, which is the advanced infantry training element of the Marine Corps before going to Camp Lejeune. We were assigned to a med cruise, Mediterranean cruise, and we did that. And after returning from that, a number of us were also selected to go down to Guantanamo Bay to basically patrol the fence line and act as a security force. And as I was patrolling the fence line, I noticed a Cuban national had jumped over, and he was going across the field, and I, in my infinite wisdom, jumped out to chase him. And as I was doing that, he just blew right up because we were in the midst of a minefield. I didn't know it. There I was like a bird dog on point, standing on one foot, quite afraid to put down the other foot, until they basically sent a helicopter to extract me from that minefield. That of course sort of endeared me to helicopters. Right after that tour, our company out of Camp Lejeune was on another med cruise, and on that med cruise, the captain of the ship also knew my uncle Joseph, and so I got the favorite treatment of being his driver for a while, and he of course assisted me in getting out of that activity and into aviation. While in Vietnam, my primary responsibility was what we would call BB&M, bullets, bread, and the mail. That was my primary responsibility while being there. Now, during the course of that, obviously, we transported a number of medevacs, a number of injuries of various types. We transported a number of prisoners as well in terms of having them go back to be interrogated. On the date that pretty much surrounds this experience, we lifted off at about 5 o'clock in the morning and were en route to do a dual operation with the Army in the area of Way. They were kind of under attack. That would be sort of out of our provincial area in terms of where we would normally fly. But it was kind of a special operation, and as we were en route to assist them, probably about 15 minutes off the ground, there was a call for a medevac from a Marine patrol that was about 15 miles away. And as we got that information and proceeded toward them, the coordinates that we contemplated them being at, they were not there. So we were already flying at about, I guess, roughly about treetop of 500 feet at least. We pulled up and went up to about 3,000 feet so that we can look around and look for those flares. And we were able to see them about 5 miles off in the distance. As we had now reached the area where the flares were, we made our usual observational pass. They had the landing guide out, and he pretty much directed us in. As we got down to maybe about, I would say altitude-wise, anywhere between 15 and 10 feet, we suffered a hellacious hit right in front of the tail rotor. The aircraft began to spin, and so we powered down. And when we hit the deck, off to the pilot's right, I was co-pilot at the time, off to his right, in a tree line, under a tree that we had obviously passed over, there was a machine gun firing right into the cockpit. And so he was raked at that time, and of course I was ducking and scrambling, and everybody, and our our crew member in the body of the aircraft was trying to get out of the way. We were able to extract him out of the aircraft, and they were still firing on the aircraft. In our mind, they were really trying to fire it up or get it to burn. And we were able to extract him and join the guys on the ground who were returning fire from an L-shaped kind of a configuration that we found ourselves in. One guy, he had a law. What is a light anti-personnel rocket. He got up to fire it, and as he got on one knee to aim in, he was struck with a machine gun fire and began to rotate. So as I was attempting to get ready to knock him down, there was an explosion which basically raked me back. And when that explosion occurred, then mortar rounds began to come in, and I was hit from the back that sort of sent me over a fire, not over a fire, but sent me over a rice paddy that was on the enemy side of the rice paddy, and there was a couple of mortar rounds that sort of propelled me back on our side of the rice paddy. And that was pretty much all I remembered until maybe about an hour before I began to sense really the plight that I had met. At that time, I began to then visualize the flashback of my hand getting blown out into my face and then spitting out particles of bone and flesh as I did that. I then began to realize that I could still hear occasional shots around me. And so I was able to open my eyes, and I could see the Viet Cong stacking those guys' weapons right off to my left. But I had made a mental decision that when they got through stacking those weapons, I was going to try to get one and see how many of those guys I can take out with me. I decided that 1, 2, 3, I was going to make an effort. That's it in my mind, 1, 2, 3, and that was it. I just couldn't make it. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get any part of my body to follow my intentions. And I said 1, 2, 3 again, and did nothing. And so I said, let me make one more good effort at it, and I did that effort, and I must have passed out then, because the next thing I knew was I could hear the Amtraks from the Marine group that had basically located all of us, and that the corpsman was going around checking everybody's vital signs. As a matter of fact, I can recall when he was checking my own. And he said, this one is gone too. When he removed my dog tags, it tore me up. And I'm trying to say to myself today, hey man, you need to check some more. I'm still kicking. Off of the back of those Amtraks, they began to put out the body bags, and I can recall being tossed in my own. That body bag was getting a bit warm and a bit stuffy. But it wasn't very long before as I can imagine, before we had reached the mortuary back at Da Nang. And so I was transferred along with the rest of the guys off of the truck and put on the cooler trays and slid into the refrigerator until the mortician can get to us. The morticians happened to have there was a Bob Hope show that was going on. And actually we had planned to go to that USO show too. In the meantime, while I was in that cooler, I should say, I'm thinking that I had just come through a stuffy bag where the temperature was warm, and now I'm still in that stuffy bag, but the temperature had began to chill down a tad bit, and it wasn't very long before I could feel myself sort of shimmering uncontrollably, and I obviously couldn't control any of that, and then that stopped after a while. But I certainly could hear them moving around outside of my door in that cooler, and when they opened the door and it was my time for the embalming table, the mortician and his aide were reviewing the Bob Hope show that they had just attended. And so the aide was basically restating the joke. And the mortician had just made his incision in my femoral artery, getting ready to change me out with the formaldehyde, so to speak. And when he made his incision and his aide had finished up with the joke, he basically laughed and backed up and was still laughing, and maybe I would guess at about no more than about 6 or 7 seconds, just going through his laughing. And when he came back to maybe give me that needle, I had bled a little bit more. And he said that I could see that was unusual. And so he began to check my vital signs, and they were able to get a slight pulse at that particular time. So everything pretty much radically changed from the embalming table to the surgical suite, where they transferred me over there, and I was still unable to move. But there was one thing that certainly didn't change at all. I was certainly able to feel. So when they put me on that surgical suite, in that surgical suite, I began to saw off my arm. I could feel every stroke because they didn't use any anesthesia. They wouldn't use anesthesia for someone who had been that injured, because they wouldn't have a way of detecting how much of it was overkill or anything like that. So they always just go with the surgical procedure until you come out of it. Well, I wasn't able to react anyway, but I could feel every stroke of that saw across my forearm. And again, in my mind, I'm just screaming, but apparently, again, I wasn't able to convey any information of that sort. The next day, the chaplain came around and blessing everyone and essentially telling us how things were going to be good and not to worry. You would be going home and God was watching over you. And that was the very first time that I was able to move. And my action at that time was to strike him in the face. And since I was off the East Coast, they sent me to the Philadelphia Naval Hospital. Probably after being there about 2 months, the individual who was the mortician in Vietnam, he came over to visit me and told me that he was a mortician that recognized that I was still alive and that I was the fifth one that he had encountered out of the coolers that was alive. As a matter of fact, if I had been his first or second one, it would have been a different outcome, because he said he had basically, prior to finding the very first one, he was a total operating alcoholic. And so when he actually found the first one, he was so guilty about how many he may have missed during his state of alcoholism that it really caused him to sober up. So after having completed school and became employed by the Veterans Administration, I sort of felt that beyond the things that I was able to do through the VA, I knew that there were certain veterans organizations like the DAV, VFW, American Legion. So as a result, I joined those organizations and became involved. And after I received my first chief's assignment, which was back in Atlanta, they were beginning a Purple Heart chapter at the local scene. And what we do actually is raise funds as best we can to meet the needs of as many veterans as we can, whether that be for food, whether that be for the light bill, whether that be for the rent, whether that be for clothing. One of the elements of that is also funding a scholarship program that Purple Heart applicants themselves can apply for, and then their kids or their grandkids or anyone in the family lineage can. We are certainly trying to do as much as we can for every veteran that we can. That individual does not necessarily have to be a Purple Hearter. If it's a veteran in need and he appeals to us, we're going to assess his need, and whatever we can do to accommodate him, we'll do that. If you've seen the horrors of war, then that doesn't ever leave you. Some of us are better able than others to sort of supplant it or put it in the back of your mind as opposed to servicing. And when I say I have a mixed blessing about it, I sort of relate to my own experience. I find that I don't talk about it, and I don't talk about it because it reminds me of too many guys that I knew who basically are not here to basically share the experience. And I think whether I have not gotten all of the assistance that I really ought to try to seek in that vein, there's always that episodic feeling of guilt that you're here and they're not. So it does make it a little tough to deal with in that vein. But I do agree from my own times as I think that if as much as I'm able to talk about it with guys who've had similar experiences, or with those who are willing to empathetically listen with the intent of trying to help you through situations, it gets easier each time around. So the more you are willing to take that chance, that exposure, I think there is a level of healing that comes along with that. I've observed it in group settings when I've seen it occur, and certainly as much as I avoid, as I say, conveying my own experience, I think that it does get easier as time goes along to sort of convey it.